Welcome to the All About Alts podcast, where we explore the world of alternative investing to help you find financial independence. Join our host, NewView Trust's president, Jason DeBono, as he covers a variety of topics with different guest speakers to discuss tax and alternative investing strategies. It is never too late to start taking control of your financial future, and we are so excited for you to be joining us for this opportunity to hear from some of the best in the business. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the All About Alts podcast. I am Jason DeBono, your host, and we got an extra special guest tonight. We've got David Green on the show today. You may not know everything he's up to, but you probably know his face and his voice from the Bigger Pockets Real Estate podcast, which he is a co-host of. David, good to have you.
Hey, man. Thanks. I'm glad to be here.
So interviewer turned interviewee today. Thanks for being here, and really excited to talk a lot about kind of what you do and how you do it and how you got where you are. I think your story is so fascinating and so many people can learn. And I think so many people have had the opportunity to kind of hear you as a co-host of a podcast, but I think they're going to be even more intrigued when they get to hear your story a little bit deeper and get to hear this kind of non-Bigger Pockets podcast stuff that you're up to. So we're going to get to that here in just a minute. You ready to go?
Oh, man. I was ready when I showed up. I love this stuff. Let's do it.
Cool. Well, you know, for those that maybe don't know David's story, I think this is something that I love hearing, which is, you know, people that have a career and then completely do a 180. And a lot of people probably are like, dude, what the hell, man? You're crazy, you know? So David started out criminal justice background, you know, through school, goes through the police academy, becomes a police officer, very successful career. A lot of people think like he's done all the hard work. Now's the time to work as an officer and work to retirement and your pension plan. And halfway through that game, you said, wait a minute, I think there's something more. Walk us through that a little bit as you kind of worked hard to get to that point. What prompted this idea that, hey, I can do my full-time career, but what else is out there?
You know, if I'm going to be totally candid about it, there's two ways to answer that question. There are absolutely practical steps that I could see, what I call the writing on the wall, when it came to the profession of law enforcement and when it came to the goals that I had for myself. And then there's also like what I call a spiritual component, which not everybody relates to. So I usually don't take that perspective all the time. But I believe that, you know, I have a relationship with God and he's sort of guiding my steps. And so oftentimes in life, I'll get this very strong emotion, this feeling like this is something I need to do that I don't really know how to explain why I have it. And it doesn't go away. It just gets stronger and stronger and stronger when I don't listen to it. And when I do listen to it, I feel like there's wind at my back pushing me. And maybe people can relate to that. Maybe some people never have. It's easy to say, well, God told me to do it. But a lot of people have done bad things over the course of history basing that. So I try not to use that explanation, but that is really what it felt like. So I didn't have any plans to be a law enforcement officer. I didn't sit down and say, hey, I want to do this. And I think I'm highlighting this because on our podcast, on your show, I'm sure we tell people they need to be intentional about what they want. And you do. But you can't always be intentional about the vision you have for your life. Like you can't just sit down and tell somebody, come up with a plan for what you want. And I'm sure a lot of people listening have heard it and they're like, I just don't know. I know I want to be somewhere better than here, but I don't always know what that looks like. So for me, I was in college. I was a business major. I knew I wanted to make money. I didn't know what that meant. So I just signed up for business. And I really focused a lot of my time on making money at the restaurants I was working at. I just sort of looked at every day, I got to get up and do the very best job I can at what I'm doing and compete in the marketplace. I liked it. That was fun for me. I'm competing against the other waiters. I'm competing against how good I did yesterday. I would sort of turn the job into a game. How much money can I make today? How good of service can I get? How much can I learn? How can I be better tomorrow than I was today? And how can I get to where my boss can't deny me? They're going to give me the best table or the best section or the best opportunity. And I sort of talk about that mindset and that approach in my book, Pillars of Wealth, How to Make, Save, and Invest Your Way to Financial Freedom, as like a blueprint for how other people can do it. Well, in the middle of school, I just thought, I don't like this. I got into the accounting section and I had a freaking instructor that was drier than a bran muffin. I couldn't stand it. I didn't understand what they were telling me. I think a lot of people can relate to they're in college and they get a bad teacher and they just makes them hate the thing. And I was very interested in psychology at that time. Just like, what makes people do what they do? What makes me do what I do? I had a very rough childhood. I had a rough relationship with my dad. A lot of things in life that I wanted, I wasn't able to achieve, or I didn't have the confidence to go after. So I had this feeling like I know there's more and I want more, but I don't think I'm worth it. And I would wrestle in my own mind. I think a lot of people that hear about real estate investing have that same thing. They watch other people do it and they want to do it, but they also think that's not for me. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. They don't always know why they feel that way, but they do. And I thought studying psychology might be the answer. So I ended up taking some psychology classes, changed my major. I threw a minor of criminal justice onto there while I was in school. And I got out and I was like, well, I don't know exactly what I want to do, but I feel like if I was in law enforcement, I would just have a little bit more confidence. So I asked myself, what job could I get that if I had that job, I would just never doubt myself again? And I thought an astronaut or an FBI agent. If I had one of those jobs in my, like, my 18-year-old brain or 19-year-old brain, I guess I was a little bit older, but that's just what I thought. So I was like, all right, I'm going to try to be in the FBI. Well, the first step was to start with the Immigrations and Customs Enforcement. I was going to go work for that department. They were hiring at that time. And then I was going to lateral over to the FBI. Well, I was like just out of college, 22 years old or something. So I failed the oral board. I had never taken a test like that before, but it was a good experience for me in that I passed a written test that was very hard. I made it much further along that process than I thought. So I thought, well, I'll go be a deputy sheriff and then that'll be easy. And then I'll just move to the FBI from there. That's what I was thinking. Had no idea how tough a police academy was going to be, how hard it was to keep a job as a police officer. At that time, there was a lot of people that wanted that job. It's very different than what it's like now. And the police academy was designed to make you quit. It was as hard as they could. I don't think they're like that now. I think it's more they're trying to get people to somehow push them through because we need police officers in the country. Well, at the time, there was like a really tough process to get in there. They took the top 64 people. Then they just try to make you quit or they try to wash you out the whole time. They graduated about 42 of us out of that group. Boom, I have a job in law enforcement. But I didn't know why I had such a strong desire to do it. It just was that feeling like I need to do this. And then there were things that would pop up in my life that would make me doubt it. And that's where my battle had to be fought. Am I going to go forward and do this? Am I going to face that fear? Am I going to be intentional and strategic about overcoming the obstacle that's right in front of me now that I have the vision of what I want to do? That led to a career in law enforcement. When I finally got in there, I had to apply at 12 different agencies before I got hired. I just hit the ground running. I wanted to learn everything I could. I wanted to be as good as I could. I wanted to work all the overtime I could. I wanted to learn from all of the older cops that were really good at what they did. I was just a sponge and I loved it. I just hit it. It was like, how good can I get at this? And eventually I ended up becoming an instructor and was probably the most productive person on the entire force as far as like how many good arrests I was able to make, court cases I was able to put together. And then I just lost the drive. It was a terrible feeling because I had put so much work into this and I had all this like relationship capital and professional capital. And I'd have lieutenants come to me and say, hey, Green, we got this situation going on. What do you think we should do? Right. These are like grown men at the ends of their career asking me for my opinion. And it was a great position to be in, but I just caught myself losing the drive. I was thinking more and more about buying more real estate and learning about markets and learning about the economy. And I was noticing that the profession of law enforcement obviously was having its relationship with the public strained a lot. It was making it very hard to get anything done, or you would work really hard and catch the bad guy and put him in jail, and then they found some reason to let him out of jail. And you're like, well, why am I caring this much? And I'm watching all the other cops sort of mentally check out. It's called quiet quitting. Okay, fine. I'm going to keep taking the paycheck, but I'm not going to give you my best. And that was rubbing me the wrong way, Jason. It was like this I knew I was fighting a mental battle where I was tempted to want to not give my best, but that wasn't the kind of person I wanted to be. And every day I went to work, I was fighting with that battle of trying to be good, but also recognizing there's an incentive to not care. So I sort of hit a point where I just had to get honest with myself, as just like I had these crazy strong emotions that said, get into this profession. I was starting to recognize maybe this was what I was supposed to do. And this phase of my life is over and I need to get into the next one. But there was fear, right? I was working a lot of overtime, making a lot of money. I was buying rental properties. I had a really good situation set up with the department. I was on the fast track to get promoted and make my way up to the top. The chief loved me. It was a great situation. And I was afraid to let it go. I think a lot of people can relate to that. They're working a W-2 job that they hate, or they want to buy an investment property, or they want to invest in a different state. Whatever it is, you know it's what you want, but you are afraid to do it. So I can really relate to that. I still remember what those emotions were. And I was I got my real estate agent's license. So now I'm selling houses as a real estate agent. I am buying investment properties, and I'm working 80 to 100 hours a week as a police officer. But I just couldn't let go of that guaranteed feel of security that you get from knowing not only do I have a paycheck, but I have overtime, I have benefits, and all the other perks. And eventually, what happened is, and this is the part I'm just being candid about, I developed really bad plantar fasciitis. It was so bad, I really couldn't stand on my feet for more than 90 to 120 seconds at a time before I needed to sit down. And sometimes I could go to work and I could get an office thing, or I was an instructor, so I teach the students and I just sit when I was talking. But then other times the duties of the job required me to stand up, and it got to be so bad that if I was covering you on a call and I had to stand to go to protect you for some reason, I couldn't focus because the pain was so bad. So I knew, I interpret it like this is God's way of saying, hey, it's time for you to get out of this. But however you look at it, I had to move on. And then when I made the jump and finally got out of law enforcement and started working as a real estate agent, in my first year, I was the top agent in the office. Like when I finally let go of all the fears that I had about not having that security, I rose to the top right away. And I realized, like, yeah, that was what that feeling was pushing me towards. I was just hesitant to take the leap.
Well, it's an amazing kind of transition because you hit on so many things through that journey, and thank you for kind of walking us through it. And I think so many people can relate. If you kind of think about the hardest part about changing careers is not the transition. Nobody gets it right the first time or the second or the third time. There's no right answer. But I think what gets hard is as you get comfortable, that those creature comforts start getting in the way. When you started in law enforcement, you didn't have a job. You applied to all these different places, but you didn't have anything to fall back on. So you needed something. And sometimes that crutch is ultimately what holds us back. And so here you are, you push yourself away from the dock, you go full time into real estate, and within a year, you're rookie of the year, top producer at Keller Williams. So let's talk about real estate, right? So you're buying real estate on the side, you're selling real estate as an agent. You know, how did you juggle both of those, and how intertwined were those two things?
Okay, this is a controversial take here. It could be David Green has a different wiring in his brain than other people have. And I hear this a lot. Well, David, other people aren't like you. I just don't know if I really buy it. I think anybody would be like me if they just took the steps that I take, right? So when I was a police officer, I recognized there are times that I need to be 1,000% focused on what I'm doing. And then there are other times where you're just kind of stuck waiting for something to happen, and my brain had nothing to do. And I was always thinking, how can I be productive? Okay. So, like, if I'm driving to a call and it's a code 3 response, lights and sirens, I got to be very paying attention to what the dispatcher is saying, what type of call it is, what information is being given, where I am, how I get from where I am to the freeway, how I make sure other cars don't hit me. There's nothing you're thinking about. You're wildly focused, and it's like a feeling like no other when you're that engaged in something that you're doing. If you ever played a sport at a high level, it's kind of like that. It can be addicting how much focus you have to have on what you're doing. Then I get on some rural area and there's no cars around, and I'm driving for 15 minutes in a row with nothing to do. And your mind's like wandering, right? Like, I played through all the what if scenarios I can. What am I doing here? And that's an extreme example, but there were many times in my job, and I think in many jobs that are like that. Some jobs do require you to be locked in 8 hours a day, 10 hours a day, looking at what you're doing. Other jobs, you're waiting for someone to respond to an email. You're sitting at a meeting and the part that you're supposed to be focused on isn't applying. You're listening to everybody else talk. And that's when everybody looks at cat videos on YouTube or checks their Facebook, or they just do something that isn't productive. It was during those times that I was communicating with the real estate agents that I was trying to buy deals out of state with, or I was communicating with the property manager about what I needed done. Or if I was a real estate agent, that's when I would take my phone out and I would look to see the questions my client had. I would answer their questions. I would put something in the calendar and send them an invite. Then I would lock back in to whatever I was doing. I mean, depending on your job, there are a lot of jobs that we tell ourselves things like, well, I'm at work, but you're not really working. You're not being productive at what the goal is. And the same was true when I became a real estate agent. I see this all the time where agents think because they're in the office, they're at work. and they're just not doing anything productive. They're not looking for leads. They're not looking up homes. They're not looking for the next client. They're not doing anything that moves the needle forward. They're lying to themselves and they're telling themselves, well, because I'm at the office, that means I'm at work. And so I can't be expected to do any better. And I think the reason I was able to do everything at once was I just only considered work to be the things that were productive. If I'm just there waiting for my shift to start and there's 20 minutes when I'm waiting for the sergeant to show up and we're all doing nothing but telling war stories or something stupid, I was thinking, how can I be productive? And I'm answering emails and I'm moving the ball forward.
Well, I love that, and I don't know if that was meant to be advice, but that's great advice. Which is how do you use and how do you recognize the difference between productive time and unproductive time? And we all have it, and sometimes our unproductive time is at work, and sometimes our unproductive time is at home. But wherever that is, so you're looking for that time and saying, how do I create efficiency out of this? How do I turn unproductive time into productive time? So let's kind of keep going down this journey, right? So you're now here you are, full time in real estate, in both on the investment side and on the selling homes and representing people as a real estate professional. If you had to pick one of those two things, right, you were able to, and I think still do both of those very successfully. But if you had to, today say, I can only be a full time real estate investor or I can only be a full time real estate agent, not both, which one are you choosing and why?
I mean, I think obviously the majority of people, and me included, would choose I would be the real estate investor because you're going to build wealth significantly faster. And for my personality, it's more conducive. I like it more. Being an agent is taxing to me. I love the problem solving of being an agent. I don't love the amount of communication it takes as a human because when you're representing someone in a transaction, it's not just solving mental problems, it's also solving emotional problems. If I'm helping you buy a house, Jason, you're going to be feeling a lot of emotions about that. If I'm selling your house, you're going to be feeling a lot of emotions about it. It's a lot of money on the line. And so there's a lot of fear. And that means that there's going to be a lot of communication needed to combat that fear. Now, this was very good for me as a human because I learned a lot about psychology and how to communicate, which means I can sort of teach that to the other people that come my way, as well as teach the investors how to communicate better. But it is draining on me. I don't mind communicating via podcasts. I don't mind solving problems mentally. If you make me listen to somebody spew for 45 minutes about how there's a crack in the plaster and they just don't know if they're up for this, that could be challenging, right? So another thing I think just to think in mind when you're trying to find the right position for you to be productive is what type of work feels light and what type of work feels heavy. Being a real estate agent feels heavy for me. Being an investor feels much lighter. But running a team of realtors, which is what I do now, where I help them solve their problems and then they go communicate with the clients, allows me to sort of keep that, turn it into a business and not be weighed down.
Well, that's smart. That's a recognition of where you add value. I love that idea of, what feels light, what feels heavy. And I think in our lives, we tend to, take it all on. And we probably could lighten our burden a lot by taking some of these things that are weighing us down. We don't love them. We're big users of the book Traction. And, if
Mm,
you've not read that or used it, it's a great business, kind of blueprint and operational system, but they call it the four quadrants of like it, love it, don't like, good at it, not good at it. And
right.
it's amazing when you start penning to paper all the stuff that you like, that you're good at versus the stuff that you don't like. And you have to accept that you're not even good at it. You start to realize quickly that we're carrying around a lot of stuff that we just don't need. And so as you're shedding through that process, and going out, now you're writing books. You've got a handful of books on the Burr method, which I love, long distance real estate buying, the pillars of wealth. So you're writing books for consumers, you're writing books for agents to help them drive wealth. How did that come into the mix? We've talked about this transition from being in law enforcement and kind of that career shifting into the real estate side as a real estate professional, both on the investment side and on the realtor side. Let's add another thing in there, right? One more spoke in the wheel because you're not busy enough. What did that look like? What urged you or compelled you to start writing and not just write a book, which most people will never do in their life, but write a series of books that have all been very successful. How'd you get there?
That was the practical answer is going to be different than like the spiritual answer, right? The spiritual answer was most of the books I write, most of the ventures in business I start are born from the frustration with somebody else. So I have a real estate team. I'm giving my loans to a loan officer. The loan officer isn't answering my client's questions. They come to me. I have to now learn how to be a loan officer so that I can communicate to my client, but I don't get paid on that. I give them all these leads, these people that are closing deals, but they're not really sending me anybody. It was like, man, what's going on? I got to do your job and I'm feeding your business, but you're not feeding mine. I'm just going to start a mortgage company. So I opened the one brokerage and now I do loans and I do real estate and I'm able to learn both. And there's a synergy between those two things, right? Like it's a very similar sales process to both structure the company with loan officers and agents, and you're working with the same client base. So I don't have to go learn how to be a arborist and also an engineer. They're very similar. The book thing was motivated by no one's teaching people what actually works. And people keep asking me questions about this. And I've been answering the same questions over and over and over. If I just wrote a book, I could just be like, read the book, and then you don't have to ask the question anymore. So that was the spiritual side. The practical side was I had been a guest on the Bigger Pockets podcast. And I have this theory that if you've ever read The One Thing by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan, they talk about geometric progression and how a 1-inch domino can knock down another domino that is 1.5 times bigger and progressively. You can start with a 1-inch domino, and by the 18th domino or so, you're knocking down something the size of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It's incredible how it scales. So every time I have an opportunity in life, I have a win. It's like knocking down a domino. Well, you're going to collect some form of a paycheck, whether it's physical or it's emotional or it's practical. But your question needs to be, well, how do I keep that momentum going? How do I make sure that domino hits another domino? So when I had a good interview on the podcast, I got Brandon Turner's phone number and I asked to be put in touch with the people that run the blog at Bigger Pockets. And then I wrote a blog article for them and they gave me some feedback about how to do it better. So I started writing blog articles for their blog section on the site and just making sure mine were better than everyone else's. It was that competition. Like these are the other ones. If mine are longer, if they're more effective, if they have more meat in them and not just theory, people like them. So because I was their top blog writer, when the publishing company decided they wanted to publish more books, they went to the blog people and said, "Hey, who are your top blog authors?" And my name came up. I got the shoulder tap. Would you like to write a book? And that's what started the process of doing it. And then what I found is after I wrote the book, I had credibility. I didn't have to work as hard to convince someone to let me sell their house, or I didn't have to work as hard to get another opportunity because if people Googled my name and they saw that I wrote a book, it just made my job easier. So that became the process of why I write books. And then after I wrote the Burr book, that one took off. It was a really big hit. It did very well. And now I know how to write a book. So I don't want to stop the dominoes there. Like, okay, I've got book writing down to a science. It's not really that hard for me anymore. I can work it into my life. So let's just make sure that there's always another book that's coming. And then I try to figure out how I take those books and I work that into the ecosystem that I'm making for my real estate team and my mortgage company and all the other things that I have.
I love it. Well, it's amazing how you've been able to accomplish so many different things on so many different platforms. And, I mentioned earlier, you are the co-host of the Bigger Pockets Real Estate Podcast, which is a great podcast. If you're not listening, certainly need to start listening. But really, I don't want to say you're not Bigger Pockets. That probably sounds bad. But Bigger Pockets is something that you support as a co-host, but you're really world and what you do every day is really outside of Bigger Pockets, right? Whether it's real estate investing, whether it's your real estate business at Keller Williams, whether it's a team of agents, whether it's your mortgage company or any of the other, myriad of businesses that you've kind of bolted on into this ecosystem. So, we're gonna really dive into that. I want to talk shop if we can make that transition, which I'm really excited to do. I know you've got a lot of insight into markets and what you're seeing, and one thing that I love about your perspective, David, is that you don't just see it from one seat, right? If you're David, just the Keller Williams real estate agent, that's a perspective. It doesn't make it good or bad. It just means it's limited. The fact that you see it from that seat and then you see it from the mortgage company seat and then you see it through the eyes of your team of agents and you see it through Bigger Pockets as a
Right.
co-host, and you see it through the speakers that you bring on. You've got a real holistic view, and so we're going to kind of dive into that. But before we kind of open that Pandora's box of what lies ahead and what are we seeing in the market, we're going to throw you on the hot seat here, David, with our quirky questions of the day. Now, these questions are listener submitted, so they are quirky without a doubt. So there's no right or wrong answer. Answer them however you want. If you've got quirky questions, send them to the All About Alts email at newviewtrust.com, and we'll get those read aloud. I've got 3 questions for you, David, if you are ready.
Let's do it.
All right. Number 1, what is the weirdest food combination you've ever enjoyed?
I don't know why people don't like ham and pineapple. I don't understand it. I grew up eating it. Why do people make a big deal about pineapple on pizza all of a sudden?
Oh man, I couldn't agree more. I'm a big ham and pineapple guy for pizza, but I was just traveling with another couple, and I mean, we had a very fiery debate, and one of the husbands of someone we were traveling with, I mean, he was adamant like fruit does not belong on pizza, and it's amazing. I
But
think
isn't
you're either
tomato
all
a
in or all
fruit?
out.
Tomatoes a fruit, right?
That's a good point. I wish I had that in my
In your
repertoire
argument?
during that argument. So, question number 2: rain or sunshine?
This is funny. So I'm a quarter Italian. My mom and her family is from Scotland. So they moved here when she was like 6 years old, and my grandparents had Scottish accents. They talk like this, Jason. Every time they speak to you, this is how they're talking. And like I can become very pale if I don't get the sun. But that quarter Italian grabs a tan really nice. So it's like I have this big spectrum between nice and tan and super pale. So I sort of have to chase the sun. Otherwise, I mean, when I was working my law enforcement career, and I was working like 7 days a week, I'm working nights for years. I remember meeting somebody and I was walking across a parking lot to meet with them. And she said, "You look like a light bulb, like you're glowing outside because of how white I can get." So I definitely like the sun.
Oh, well, that's one of those compliments that you have to really scratch your head around, and glowing can be taken lots of different ways. But good to know. As a Florida guy, obviously you have to learn to love them both because you're going to get them both, and sometimes multiple times in the same
Mm.
day. Um, this is a fun one. I love this question for you, David, because I think you have such a very, I think, good but pragmatic way of looking at the world, right? And careers and opportunities, and kind of what lies ahead is whatever lies ahead. And I think your difference is not that you don't plan any more than anyone else. You're just ready to seize opportunity better than most, which is super cool. But let's kind of take this and throw that all to the wayside and kind of think about this question. If you could choose any job in the world, regardless of qualifications, requirements, salary, commitment, etc., what is it?
Oh gosh, that's really good. What would I do if I could do anything? I mean, it would probably be the closest thing to a superhero that you can get, right? If you could go be Thor or Captain America, I think that's what all of us would want to do, which now puts you into some kind of soldier or law enforcement person. So like what job did Jason Bourne have? Maybe like CIA operative or something like that. That'd be pretty fun.
Yeah, well, you've got some of the qualifications, David. I hear you there with the police officer, and I'm thinking check, check, check. So yeah, maybe next time you're on the show, I hope that you're in a position to give us a little highlight of what you do, but maybe it's so confidential, like Jason Bourne, you can't actually tell us what your job is.
A
But
great point. Maybe
I
I'm already doing it and I just can't talk about it publicly, right?
That's exactly right. He really didn't exit law enforcement. He just graduated into the real secretive class that he needs a cover. I think was it Meet the Fuckers, where the
Yeah.
guy's cover was rare plant salesman, and
Yep.
your cover is real estate investment. So here we are.
Jack Talk Tie.
That's right, Jack Talk Tie. Very well, David. Very very well. Well, listen. Thanks for getting on the hot seat. I love the questioners the listeners submit, and I think they were really good given some of our dialogue. So let's get back into it because I think our listeners, they love your story, and I hope that everyone listening kind of just hears the things that he said, which is, hey. I didn't have this great, robust plan. I did not sit down and pen to paper and say, this is what I'm doing. And I'd go so far, and maybe David, you'll agree with me to say most of the people that do that either fail in real terms because they'll never right, meet up to what's on the paper, or they'll fail in non-real terms, which is they check the boxes on the paper, but it's not really what they want,
Mm.
right? They're doing it because they wrote it down and they feel obligated, but at the end of the day, they're not actually accomplishing or getting to where they want to be. So you've gotten in this world, you've built this ecosystem. Let's start with a little bit of maybe kind of the last 6 to 12 months. What does that look like? Walk us through the life of David Green. Where has your primary focus been? What areas of business, market, et cetera? But what's the last 6 or 12 months been like for you, and what have you been working on that maybe we're not seeing day to day?
Oh boy. I mean, if you go back about 18 to 24 months, I had a crazy twist in my life. So real estate's churning along. I'm adding agents to the team. We're selling 50 houses a month. I'm one of the top teams or realtors in the country. I got a loan company I just started. The future's really bright with that. We're one of the top brokerages in the country. Everything's going great. And then, long story short, somebody figures out how to get into, if you're familiar with the website that manages legal entities in Florida, there was a glitch in there that allowed someone to add themselves as a manager to my LLC. You can't delete anyone's information, but you can add yourself to other people's legal entities. They then paid a notary to say that I signed documents, which I never did, transferring the title of 50 of my Florida properties into somebody else's LLC. This person goes around to real estate meetups claiming he's a wholesaler and has these great deals, and he's selling these to other people. Long story short, I lose control of the assets because he actually has valid legal documents showing that they're his, even though they were fraudulently obtained. I get them back after like a year. Several people in my company got stressed out from this and had to quit because none of us understood at the time, like, what do you do when you're having these problems? So that crippled me pretty good. A judge gives me back the title to them after the guy gets arrested. It took the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office a long time to finally be able to figure out how to prosecute this crime. Get the title back. I sell them all to a hedge fund because the state of Florida told me we can't guarantee this won't happen again. In fact, it could happen today. So I just wanted to sell them as quick as I could because I knew that the guy, I know how criminals work, and he's sitting in a jail cell telling all of his homies, hey, this is how I did it. And they're going to go do it again. So sell it all, pushes me into a 1031. I have to now go invest a lot of money at one time. And this is right when interest rates are starting to creep up. So it was right around that time when we were seeing the Fed tick them. And I'm like, this is a bad time to be going all in, having to buy a lot of real estate, but I have no choice. I was pushed to the plank with that pirate sword and I gotta jump off. And I'm looking down there like, well, do I jump to where the sharks are? Do I jump to where the rocks are? What's the best thing that I can do? So I come up with the plan that I am going to identify as many properties as I can in the markets that I think will be most resilient if indeed we do go into a recession from these rate hikes. So I'm looking in Arizona, I'm looking in Florida, I'm looking in Texas, Tennessee, and I think Savannah, Georgia. I identify as many properties as I possibly can on a list, and I give it to the 1031 company on day 44. You have 45 days to identify your properties. I learned a lesson that I had never heard anyone else talk about, even as the host of the podcast. I'd never heard this rule. No one told me this rule. There is a 1031 restriction that you can only identify 200 times as much real estate as you sold. It rarely ever comes up because typically you wouldn't need to identify more than that. But because my portfolio was almost paid off, I had to reinvest all of that capital. And long story short, it was very difficult to identify anything when you have to spend that much money. So I had one day to give them the list of what I would identify and have to close on in 180 days. And if I can't put it in a contract that day, I can't feel confident that it is one of the ones I will put in a contract later. What if someone else bought the property? Now the whole 1031 doesn't work because I didn't close on the ones I identified. Crazy stressful day. Basically had to throw out any market that I thought had a downside, which also meant throwing out a lot of the upside. I settled on a market in Tennessee that I thought doesn't have great upside, but also doesn't have great downside. If I have to make crazy fast decisions, I want to at least try to cover my bases and play some defense. Buy a lot of properties in that market and hand them over to a property manager that somebody else had referred me to that said was incredible. This was the same property manager that helped me to buy the property. So my agent owns a property management company, is telling me this is the house, this is the rents, and I'm like, well, this is a pretty good system if I'm getting all the intel from the same person. Well, turns out that they were not a good human being, that they were grossly inflating the numbers that the properties were actually going to get, that they took the properties from me and they didn't even get new pictures taken. They literally took the ugly pictures from the MLS of the properties that I targeted, and they were advertising them that way. So those properties weren't doing well. I bought some other properties in some other cities that were like grade A neighborhoods that I was thinking this is the safest. If I got to put my money somewhere, I want to put it somewhere that if I got to get out, I can get out easily, because you're in a 1031, so you're in this big rush. As well as the fact that maybe they won't cash flow as solid, but at least I'm defensively sound. Well, then all these cities got involved. And so the cities don't want short-term rentals in their neighborhoods because the neighbors complain, even though the state does not allow them to prohibit you from doing it. So they can't pass a law that says you can't have a short-term rental, which is why I'm buying there. But the city themselves just jams you up with the paperwork. So I apply for the permit. They have an inspector walk the property. And they come back and say, oh, this house that you bought has a duplex on the lot. You have to tear down the duplex. Why? Well, because in 1943, when it was built, they didn't complete the permit process. Okay, so like 80 years it's been there. No one had an issue. Then you apply for the permit. They tell you to tear it down. Then they go look at the rest of the house and they basically just go over with a fine-tooth comb and they're like, oh, your electrical system's outdated. Oh, you're gonna have to replace the roof. Like they give you these huge lists of things that cost $300,000 to $500,000 to spend to make your property worth less than it was. And then it sits there in the permitting department for a year. And this happened to me over 8 different multi-million dollar properties. So I went from like everything was crushing it to that happening. Then interest rates go up significantly, right? So the businesses that were doing amazing, they all just grind to a halt because no one's buying houses anymore. You can't sell houses. You can't get mortgages on homes. It became just a nightmare. Now all of your best leaders in your company start quitting because it's hard. It was easy when we were on the easy train and everything's crushing. Now they're like, oh, this isn't easy money. I'm going to quit this and go try to be a crypto investor, or I want to go do something else that's easier than this. So everything went from it was doing amazing to it just fell apart in a very, very short period of time. So I've been spending the last 2 years just steadily trying to eat this elephant of a pain in the butt. I'm trying to fire those property managers I told you about. I hired an in-house person to now take over my stuff. Well, now the property manager that I told you about that ripped me off is trying to sue me for trying to break the contract that I have with them, right? The properties are bleeding money every month. They're making less than half of what they should be if we were managing them. Plus, I have all the expenses, and they don't want to release the property because they think I'm rich and they can sue me and they can get $500,000 out of me. So I guess what I'm saying is everything was going great, and then the interest rates go up, the person rips me off, I have to go invest the money, and everything goes terrible. So I'm now back in a lot of ways at square one. I'm trying to get control of these assets back. I'm trying to hire new people so that we can take them over. I'm learning a ton of lessons about business, about the market, about how things can go. I'm still trying to host the podcast, and I'm trying to teach other people based on the lessons that I'm learning and the things that I see happening in the economy. And I'm starting new ventures. So I'm going to be starting my own brokerage. Instead of hanging my license somewhere else, I'll have my own company where I can recruit agents from across the country that want to follow me and teach them how to be real estate agents. I'm starting my own property management company. So everything that I learned from that nightmare with that company and a couple others, we will be managing properties, and I will be paying attention to the leadership. Because Jason, what happens when you meet with a business owner a lot of the time, whether it's your CPA, a bookkeeper, a property manager, whatever, the business owner themselves are great. You talk to them on the phone, the person that's going to market your social media, and they're a brilliant person. You're like, this is the person. You sign up with their company. They delegate the work to some W-2 worker who makes $18 an hour remotely and doesn't like working hard. And that's the person managing your books or controlling your social media or managing your rental property, talking to the guests when they have a complaint. They're talking to $18 an hour, doesn't want to be there, Bob. And Bob's given a terrible effort, and you're stuck because you signed a contract with them. So that's like another thing that I knew to interview the person. I knew to pick the right person. I did not think the second step ahead, which is, well, who are you going to delegate this to? This happens in life. It happens in business. It's not what you know that's coming that's going to hurt you. It's what you don't know. So now, like you asked me what's in the future, it's a revamp of me bringing everything in-house. I've hired my own bookkeeper, but you got to go through 4 bad ones before you get a good one. I've hired my own property manager. I'm going to be switching to a brokerage and hiring more agents. And now I have control over the quality of the people that do my stuff, which means I can offer that to other people who are not having a good experience with a bookkeeper or a property manager. And then I make sure that the people we're delegating to are not like leave me alone, Larry. Just they don't want to have to do any work.
Well, you're highlighting for everyone, you know, what I think is something that often gets left behind. You can listen to podcasts and speakers and events, and everybody talks about all the glam, right? I bought this property and it's done great. I did this. The reality of any business, I don't care what business you're in, and real estate especially, you got to go through some trials and
Mm,
tribulations. And sometimes, right, if we kind of go back to the very origin of all this, right, it was a cyber attack, right? Like, think about that. When in the world of real estate would you ever think that you're on the side of cyber attack? Now, we run a financial services company with billions of dollars of clients' money. Believe me, if you want to know what keeps me up at night, it's cyber attacks, right? Because I have to think that way. I own investment property. If you asked me until you just said that, I would have probably said there's a 0% chance of a cyber attack in my real estate world. Yet here we are, right, talking about a cyber attack that now kind of unleashed this series of events that you've had to work through. And that's the beautiful thing, but also the difficult thing about being an entrepreneur. And real estate is a business. And it is a business that has employees. It is a business that has to make people
mm.
happy. It has customers. It has all of those things. Even if you own one rental, you have customers, right? It's whoever's staying the night in that rental. So, I appreciate you being kind of open and honest about that. I think all too often, too many, professionals that are in the limelight of real estate, they feel like they've got to always sell this lifestyle and dream, which is great. I love that. Let's talk about the fact that you have financial freedom, and all of that is good, but it's not financial freedom without, right? It's financial freedom that comes with, and that with is something that has to be palatable. So let's talk about going forward. You talked about kind of revamping. Let's talk about the market, right?
Mm.
It's kind of interesting. You go back and look a couple years ago. I mean, I had the same thought process, right? Interest rates are going up. It's going to sink the economy. Real estate's dead. My goodness. I mean, if real estate has not been the most resilient asset class in the last 24 months, in any asset class in probably the 20 years I've been doing this, I'd say I'd really, would beg to differ. How did real estate stay so successful? And I'm not saying every market, but how did real estate hold on well? And then let's turn that to a two-part question, which is, now you got interest rates that are at least flatlined. I think we're all pretty comfortable there. Depending on your viewpoint, they're certainly likely to go down. Whether they go back to where they were or whether they go
Right.
down a little bit, what do you foresee? And what do you think that looks like from both you as an investment professional, and then also for like traditional home buyers and you running a mortgage company and a real estate company and a property management company? A lot there, and I'm pouring it on you, but I'll let you dive through and navigate us through kind of those questions.
Well, I think real estate did prove to be much more resilient than anything else. And I think that's because of the crazy inflation we have. I think real estate investors make a mistake when they get too bogged down in the details and they don't look at the big picture. We can claim to be a lot smarter than we really are when our properties do well, and most of us do. But the reason that my net worth grew so much was because of inflation. It was not that I bought properties at 50% of what they're worth and I'm this shrewd negotiator. I bought a lot of properties in the right areas. I waited long enough. The government printed a ridiculous amount of money and it made money worth less, which made you need more dollars to buy the same thing, which meant that the price of everything went up. And when you own a $500,000 asset or $1 million asset and it goes up by, say, 15%, you just made $150,000 on $1 million asset. And what if you had 5 of them? Like, how long does it take to make and save that much money? It's insane. It shouldn't work that way. But my perspective is the government is reckless and irresponsible. And so I played the game in a way that benefited me from their bad decisions. And I fully expect that to continue, if I'm just being honest with you. I think that the next time we end up where we should have a recession, we will just print a bunch of money and do something else. Maybe they don't call it quantitative easing. They'll have another big several syllable word to describe it so the average person doesn't know what they're doing. But that's what's going to happen. And I think real estate stays so resilient because if you invested in other things, bonds, stocks, treasuries, anything, and your return on those investments would be less than what inflation was. Real estate was the only thing that actually was going to outperform inflation. So my opinion is all the smart money moved into it. You're making money on cash flow. You're making money on appreciation. You're getting a loan pay down. If your asset does go down in value, which it didn't, but if it did, you're pretty confident it's going to bounce back up. It just showed the superiority of the investment. So when everybody else got worried because there wasn't easy money to be made, they flooded to the safe money, which was real estate. And unless we sort of figure out a way to build a bunch of houses very quickly and we increase the supply, I don't think there's anything that's going to make real estate go down. You always need it. It has multiple uses. You can live in it. You can live in it and rent it out to somebody else. You can invest in it. You can make it a short-term rental, a medium rental, a long-term rental. You've got all the rental terms, kind of like Goldilocks, and some of this porridge was a little too hot and some was a little too cold. It's becoming extremely flexible. There's more financing options than ever. There's more people talking about it than ever. When I look at where would money go other than real estate, it is hard for me to think of anything that it's going to perform as well because everything else is too easy to inflate. It's just too easy to come along and say, I'll print more money or I'll print more of this cryptocurrency or I'll just make more of this thing. Unless you're talking about gold or something that's very hard to get out of the earth, real estate's probably going to be the best. I think what is more likely to happen in the future is that to buy a house yourself becomes a flex of the wealthy. I am worried about a future where people are going to say, hey, housing's too expensive for us to invest in. So let's make a way that we can do fractionalized ownership. We'll all put in 10 grand or we'll all put in 50 grand and we'll have 1/50th of the ownership of this house. And owning real estate becomes like owning a stock where you own a share of a company, or REITs become much more common and they're not as big as they are. So you have 1/50th of a portfolio that somebody else put together and they get paid to manage. I don't want this to happen, but if we continue to deflate the currency and money has to go somewhere, I think this is likely to happen. I think we're already seeing the first steps of it with institutional funds buying up as many houses as they can at the same time that the small mom and pop investor is talking about, well, it has to come down. Prices, there's no cash flow. Who's going to buy real estate? The people that have a lot more money than you. It'll cash flow if they put 50% down, right? And they're not even worried about cash flow because they know as we deflate the currency, the value is going to skyrocket, right? The only person that cares about cash flow is the person who's not financially sound. They're not financially independent. They're trying to get out of their mess and they're using cash flow to get it. And that's one of the reasons that I'm sort of banging the gong right now saying, stop obsessing over cash flow to quit your job. This was something that influencers waved over your nose and said, yeah, buy real estate. And then you could just live life on your own terms. And they gave you this idea that that was possible. You want to be as financially strong of a position as you can. Buy real estate. And if you get enough cash flow to quit the job you hate, go get a job you like. Go start a business. Go do something else that can make more money. Like continue to create income and to live beneath your means. That's the offense and defense I talked about. Continue to invest the difference. Continue to put money into like tax protected vehicles because that's a good form of defense, and maybe invest out of those, but you're still building this net worth and these assets while you can get them. So I'm not as worried as other people about buying real estate and the market collapsing. I am much more worried about not buying real estate and then not being able to in the future.
Well, I really appreciate that perspective because I think so many people are kind of scared to say that, right? Which is, we think maybe that this institutional buyer model is here to stay, and I think that's something that I'm with you on is likely not going away. And these institutions are buying all this stuff and realizing there's some really good money to be made in here. And I do fear for the same reasons that individuals will struggle to buy homes. What's interesting about the United States, and we're in a very weird time in our lives, is because historically, and David, you're in California, I'm in Florida. when we say expensive real estate, right,
Yeah.
we both mean two completely different things. And expensive to you may be, a $3 million house, whereas expensive in Florida may be $1 million. And with remote work, and we're seeing this kind of shuffle of geographics. I mean, David, we were chatting before the show even started, right? People packing up and moving out of state A and moving to state B in record numbers. And that's happening across all 50 states. And I don't think that trend is going anywhere anytime soon. So, it'll be curious to see what happens. Inflation is such a weird time because it gives people a lot of answers to questions that may not be the right answers. And one thing that's been interesting that I've been following a lot in real estate, and I'd love to get your take, we have not seen a slowdown in consumer spending because they haven't had to. And if we look at 2007, consumers were outpriced, right? I mean, truly outpriced. And we say today that consumers are being outpriced. You can't buy milk and you can't buy eggs and you can't buy a house because inflation. But if you look at what the average person made 5 years ago versus what they're making today, inflation has run, pretty rampant in payroll too. And that's helped fuel inflation, which is not good, but it's also kept us from being in this weird, environment where it's starting to hit people's paychecks. What do you see in that, over the next maybe 12 months, and as an employer, and you mentioned kind of employees doing X and Y. Do you see inflation on the payroll side keeping up enough, or enough money being printed where we won't have this kind of loss of spending and consumer sentiment and excitement around buying everything in sight? Is that here to stay, or can we expect maybe that changing at some point?
No, I think I'm worried about the opposite. I think that the price of goods and services and assets will continue to go up and wages will not keep up. And I think it's a mistake that we assume that wages are on the same level as the price of goods and services, because if one goes up, the other has to. And we already saw the fallacy in that thinking when we said, well, rates are going up, so the price of homes must go down. It doesn't. The price of homes is based on supply and demand. Okay. The demand for homes went down when interest rates went up. It did not go down enough to stop people from buying them. It just meant that they didn't go up in value as fast as what they were going up. Okay. The goods and services issue is a matter of supply and demand. Are people going to buy them? And how many of them are there? So as everything becomes more expensive, those costs get pushed on the consumer. And the only thing that would stop that is if less people bought the stuff, but people have to buy the stuff. The employer does not have to give a raise. They're going to give you a raise based on how much they have to pay you to do that job. And if someone else is willing to do it for less, they don't have to give you the raise. And with all of the technological advances that we see happening right now, particularly with artificial intelligence and remote work, I can go hire somebody to work in Kansas for a half of what I had to pay someone to do that job for in the Bay Area. And you know what, Jason? That Kansas person has a wonderful attitude. They're constantly saying, what more can I do for you? How else can I help? Oh, by the way, I did this for you also. And I love them. I'm giving them more of my attention. Then you get the California person that's like, oh, I have to come into the office. Oh my gosh, that's not my job. Why don't you make somebody else do it? And to the California person's perspective, they are being like mistreated if I ask them to do something that they didn't do yesterday. To the Kansas person's perspective, they are being blessed with more opportunity and more attention and more opportunity to go out there and get a raise because they did more. It's very different mindsets that you see. And what I think is going to happen is that more and more jobs are going to be lost. That means more and more people will be hitting the job market, and employers will be paying people less and less, not because they're greedy and terrible people, but because it's silly to pay somebody more money to give you a worse effort. And I think that if people are not prepared for that, and they still have this idea that you shouldn't have to work and only suckers work, and you should be on the beach drinking Mai Tais because you bought 3 duplexes and you made it, and this type of attitude that's become normalized, it's be like a tidal wave that wipes people out financially that they don't see coming. I'm in the opposite mode. I'm like, look, everything's getting harder. I have a mortgage company. How long before AI can take over underwriting and we don't need a loan officer to do that? I'm telling all my guys, I know you think your job is to collect documents and type into a computer what the numbers say. Your job is to give great service to the person. When you come complain, oh my gosh, they have all these questions. That's the only part of your job that a computer can't do right now. You need to be doubling down on the fact they have questions and getting good at communication and getting good at customer service, and then just getting good at typing stuff in the computer as fast as you can, because that part doesn't matter. But to the employee, Jason, they think that's their job. I did the underwriting. Why should I also have to talk to them? And I think about how many people have that attitude. I bought a short-term rental. Oh, my guest still isn't there. I want to go to bed at 9:30 and they haven't checked in, and they give them attitude when they talk to them. Well, that guest is the only person that's paying you rent right now. That mortgage is due, that utility bill is due, those repairs you have to make on the property are going to have to be made no matter what. The guest is the variable. And if you don't want to give great service to them, why are they going to go there? How long before other companies like Expedia start buying up all these properties themselves and conglomerating them all together and saying, we're just going to hire people in another country and pay them $4 an hour to talk to these humans, and they'll have a great attitude. And the owner operator that's mad they have to do any work because it's not passive isn't going to be able to compete. So I know this is a bit of a pessimistic perspective, but I think with what we've seen, right? The COVID disaster, that rumor of a thing that's just going to be killing everybody slammed everything to a grinding halt. Interest rates bumping up a couple percent destroyed the housing industry as far as the sales of these transactions were done, right? Like, it does not take much to disrupt what we think is normal and that we're entitled to. And my opinion is that we should be going to work every day, learning as much as we can with as good of an attitude as we can possibly have, giving our very best effort, knowing that there's going to be less opportunity. And we want to be the one that keeps the opportunity that we have, rather than saying, well, I'm not going to try hard until you give me a better chance.
Well, amen, David. Amen. I see it through the same lens, and remote work, I think, everybody views as this major benefit, and I understand why. I think remote work is great, and I think the ability for people to have better work-life balance is great. So I'm all for it. Unfortunately, people view remote work as I can work less, or I don't have to work hard, or I don't need as many skills. And that's a real slippery slope, because in we're here in Florida. If I'm going to hire someone at our office, that's geographically desirable, I got maybe 2,000 candidates. But if remote work is the best way to go, I've got 200,000 candidates that now are at my repertoire. And so as an employer, it's real easy to look at the 2,000 and say, well, gosh, why deal with that headache when I've got 200,000? And there's certainly a lot of opportunity there. So, yeah, I think there's a lot going on. I think for those listening, I think David makes some incredibly valid points, and I'll second them. And that is, are you working harder than the person next to you? And in the past, it was only the person next to you on the shop floor.
That's it.
Today, it's the person next to you, not just in the United States, it's in the world. And that's not a bad thing, right? We all need some motivation to work a little bit harder and find our path. So last thing that I want to highlight that you said that I love is, like, there's nothing passive, right? This idea of, like, I'll just buy these passive investments, and maybe there's a place for that. But if that's your primary means of income is passive, you're setting yourself up for disaster, because you can have secondary sources of income that are passive. You can get to the point of retirement where you've got some passive income. But if you're not taking a deliberate, control over your dollars today, especially when you're in peak earnings years, you're going to be missing that boat and missing it big. Well, David, I love the conversation. If we had more time, we'd just keep running through it. The good news is you're actually coming to Florida in October to speak at our AltsCon conference, which we're super pumped about. Coming up October the 17th and the 18th. David's going to be one of our headliners. And, a lot of what we talked about today, and just sharing his story, but sharing what's going on in the world. And that's about 6 months out. So, it'll be interesting to kind of fast forward and see what's changed, right? See the progress that you made in some of your revamping, and then see, hey, what lies ahead? We're going to be smarter in 6 months about some things, and we're going to be just as uncertain about other things. So excited for that. If you want to join David, and you want to join the New View team, and you want to join hundreds of like-minded investors really looking to invest in alts and do it in tax-efficient manners, certainly join us at AltsCon. You can go on to altscon.com. That's altscon.com. But if you use code GREEN24, that's green with an E24 for David Green, that'll get you a ticket for $49, right? These tickets are $149. It is the cheapest ticket we will sell to this event. And we'll be running that until the end of March. This podcast will air sometime in March. And so you'll have till March 31st of 24 to take advantage of that code. David, we're going to let you off the hook here. Thanks again for being here and being a great guest. But we ask everybody in season 2 of the show the same question. And so we'll wrap up with this one, which is, what's keeping you up at night, David?
Oh, if everything I just mentioned wouldn't make sense to keep me up at night, I don't know what would be. But to be more specific on that, I myself, I will admit, was a victim of this toxic kind of thinking. When I first got into a group called GoBundance, which I'm still a member of, I heard a lot of the older guys there talk about you need passive income, passive income. What they were trying to say is just get out of this like line of thinking that you just go to work every day and let your employer control your success. You need to be thinking about what you want to do in life. And if you own investments, which is what they meant by passive income, you're going to have more freedom to go make more decisions. But what I heard was once I have something, I should turn it over to someone else and it should just be fine. So I started businesses, got them running, handed it to somebody else. I started investments, got them going, handed them over to someone else. I got a new CPA. I had a new bookkeeper. Their bookkeeper was terrible for about 2 years. I didn't really know what the books were because they were so bad. And I did not know how poorly all of those opportunities were performing because I was off to the next thing. Moral of the story is there is no passive income. Like you said, there's passiver income. There's a spectrum of passivity and there's definitely a side that's better, but it will never be completely passive. You have to pay attention to it. And that was a toxic attitude that I had that I thought that's possible. And I thought if I have to work, if I have to pay attention, then someone's screwing up somewhere and I'm going to be mad about it. And I've let go of that. There is no passive income. There's another toxic attitude that says you should look for the way to make the most money with the least work possible. It's a terrible attitude. It's like being in a relationship. If you had that same idea, how do I get someone to like me the most? By trying the least. You're always going to be jumping from one person to the next. And you're going to be susceptible to people that manipulate you because there's always a person that's going to pretend like they like you a lot that you didn't have to earn it because they want your money or your attention or something from you. Okay. When you have that attitude as an employee or a person in the business world, what's the least I can do and make the most I can? You get on this slippery slope of constantly getting into worse and worse opportunities with employers that are desperate to hire you. And guess who the first person to get laid off is when the economy turns around? It's that person. I mean, I literally hired one of the in-house people I told you about because they had their job down to work in 2 hours a day instead of 8. They were a remote worker and they were getting paid 15 grand a month. And they thought they won. They were bragging about this. They're like, I got it down. I got passive income at my W-2. Well, as soon as the economy turned around and they made layoffs, first person to get fired. Didn't feel so smart at that point. So what keeps me up at night is how many people will not listen to what I'm saying, that have this idea that you don't need to pursue excellence. You don't need to bring value. You don't need to grow. You don't need to push yourself. You just got to look for an easier opportunity that pays more. Those are the opportunities that will work for a short period of time, but they will go away. You need to be pursuing being better at what you do every day. It's the safest road you can take.
I love it. Well, David, thanks again for being here. If you want to hear more of David, you want more dialogue like today, join us at AltsCon in October. Don't forget the code GREEN with an E, GREEN24. Get you a ticket for $49. Take advantage of that from the time you hear this till the end of March of 24. All right. Well, thanks everybody for tuning in. Hit the like, share, subscribe button and leave us a 5-star review. Help us continue to build this community where we bring in, various people that just give us some real keen insight into the world of investing. And I think I'm going to steal a word from you. And I'm not sure it's even in the dictionary, but passiver. It may be my new word, David. And I think we're onto something with that. And we're going to continue to help people understand how to make passiver income. But you're not going to do it sitting on your ass all day. You're going to have to get up and work for it. So, David, thanks for switching sides in the podcast chair and joining us. And all the best. Looking forward to continuing to hearing you on your podcast and looking forward to catching up in October and seeing all that you've been up to. Take care, man.
Thank you, Jay.
Thank you so much for listening. We hope the information within this podcast has given you the tools that you need to find your way to financial independence. We would love to partner with you on this journey. Text ALTS, that's ALTS, to 407-708-1853 to learn more about how to get started today. Don't forget to follow us to make sure you don't miss a second of content, and we'll see you next week.